Hey folks, welcome back to the Corax and Coffee Cast. I'm your host, Pete Steele.
And I'm your other host, Rick Hendricks.
And this is where we are all about playing games in public.
We're all about bringing new people into the hobby and pushing back hard against that stereotype that gamers are asocial beings.
So before we get started today, we do want to thank our behind-the-scenes people, our producer Keegan King, and our consultant of board games and people who are enthusiastic about board games, but not gamers, Miss Shaw.
But today, we have a recurring guest, our own Sarah Vasa.
Hello.
Today we're going to dive into how to play with newcomers to board gaming at the table. You've managed to get them to the table, you've convinced them to sit down and potentially play a game. So now what?
So now it's the make it or break it moment.
No pressure!
The goal in session 1 is really to get them to want to come back for session 2. There's nothing so valuable in my LARPing experience as a player who's come back for session 3. At that point, you've got them hooked. We're going to be talking about a number of thoughts, strategies, and considerations for making newcomers to the game feel less anxious, more able to engage with the game or games you put in front of them.
And I think most importantly, welcome at the gaming table.
So everything we're going to be talking about are variations on that particular theme, but it's really this simple. Whether you're asking a family member or a friend to try an activity they have very little experience in, especially compared to you, regardless of what that activity is, you're asking them to learn something new and engage in something new. And to be honest, that takes a lot of emotional energy, regardless of what you're doing, be it board gaming or figure skating or whatever else.
Yeah, I think it's important to be prepared for newcomers to feel quite overwhelmed. In fact, they may not even look like they're having fun at first. Of course, check in on them, but also be prepared that you're going to be the one who's going to be giving all the emotional energy to the game and to help them feel more involved. That said, also be prepared for newcomers to only want to play one game if you brought multiple, or even just to stop after one game rather than replaying multiple times. Again, it's draining to learn new things, even when it's supposed to be fun. So having a backup plan is something, for something simpler or to start simple is really important.
So this is all about helping to support and reduce the anxiety of that person so they can better engage and enjoy the experience that they're having.
Ultimately, when you sit down at a board gaming table, the primary goal is always for everyone to have fun. But we think it's important to keep in mind that, quote, fun, unquote, can and does come in all shapes and sizes, which can be both positive and negative depending on exactly who's making up your gaming group.
You don't have to win to have fun.
Yeah, and I think the secondary goal, coming right after the primary goal of fun, is to get the newcomer to come back for board game number 2, board game session number 2, game night number 2. Because that's really what you're after if you're trying to bring people into the hobby or into the experience. With all of that in mind, who cares what you play and who cares who wins? And I think that's something that we should come back to later.
With that, when you're trying to front load fun into that first gaming experience, don't worry about having all of the rules perfect. You definitely, whoever's teaching the rules needs to be competent in teaching those rules, but a dirty little secret, which I think we've mentioned before, is that even hardcore gamers constantly screw up or miss little rules. So if you screw up or miss it, just don't worry about it. Just move on, come up with a solution, and keep going.
And be careful in managing that negative fun of the OGs, I really just got smoked there variety, as that can be an acquired taste. We'll get them there, but don't overwhelm them right off the bat.
Rick and Sarah, I think a lot of this may seem obvious once it's been said. But the reality is that gamers, I know for myself, and Rick, and just listening to you and Keegan and many other gamers that I've played games with and just talk with, either online or in person, the reality is that gamers immerse themselves in certain types of jargon and interactions and understanding of certain systems and have expectations that become second nature to them, keyword being them. But the reality is that this jargon and these systems are by no means second nature to non-gamers who don't say them and interact with them on the regular.
Yeah, long-term gamers instinctively know that there's got to be a downside to that power move, lest players do it every time. but pointing that out and explaining a place where the move is still worth it versus a place where it's not might be really important for a newcomer.
Yeah, so it's just important to verbalize some of these things, at least some of the time, just, to model the thinking out loud.
As a non-gamer, but somebody who plays games, what I have found really helpful is to call that first game of a new game a teaching game. I think this takes away some of the pressure, allows all of the players at the table to ask questions and give suggestions and just generally deconstruct aspects of the game while playing. But I would caution to not give so many suggestions that you aren't letting the new player actually learn the game and get into the world on their own. Nobody likes an over-explainer. Making mistakes is part of learning, and I think it's important to remember that, even during those teaching games.
So let's talk about that first gaming night with a newcomer. You want to choose where and when to play your first session carefully. You want spirits to be high initially to get new players over the hump of the initial learning stage and coasting down into the fun. Distractions at this stage are really bad because until the game starts being fun, just about anything is going to be enough to derail things.
Yeah, I remember a social that I went to in pre-pandemic times where we were trying to teach a party game. Party game, you think, oh, well, it doesn't really matter. But because there was so much happening, even for a party game, it went absolutely nowhere because half the group was trying to actually engage with the rules and learn the game, while the other half just wanted to have side conversations and beer. And so I think both halves ended up being frustrated. It made the game night, it's important to make the game night intentional. Make sure everyone there is on board or on board enough to at least sit down, listen, and give it a go.
Yeah, and related to that point, Sarah, I remember being at a party during COVID. We're all masked and whatnot, but we thought COVID was going down. Much to our chagrin, we were wrong. But at this party, I brought a party game and busted it out. It's like, oh, let's try this. I really wanted to play, and I thought people would enjoy it. And we played 1 or 2 rounds, and then half the people were really into it, and the other half of the people were like, now let's go back to drinking and just shooting the breeze. And I was bummed because I wanted to play the game, and I wanted other people to enjoy it. But I realized, you know what? This is not a time to push a game on people. This is not a game night. This is just a social interaction, so let the game go, because you definitely don't want people to have a negative experience with this game or any other at any point, insofar as you can control it. So with that in mind, I think it's really important to know your audience and don't push it. But when you are at a kind of a game night gathering, make sure you've got a good ratio of stuff that people do like, as well as things that might push them a little bit. But, if people like cool explosions, make sure you have that type of thing. Don't start with a bluff-heavy game for new gamers, or if you know that a particular person dislikes mischievous dishonesty within the context of a game, even though it's just a game, you're just adding an extra hurdle that they may not like, and they just might not have the mental or moral juice for it, for whatever reason.
That emotional energy.
And yeah, absolutely. Emotional energy. Related to knowing your audience, it's, I think, critical to have visual appeal in a game, especially for new gamers, and brand recognition. Brand recognition is so much more important than many gamers give it credit for, or think it might be.
I'll agree with you there. Because you're asking this person to lay out a fair bit of emotional effort to get started on this game. So you don't really want to waste half of that momentum on, I know this looks boring, and you've never heard of this world we're getting into, but allowing them to get bored before the first round is death. One of the best examples of this that hooked me was Lord of the Rings Risk. The game did admittedly add some new mechanics that weren't present in the original, but for me it was just more important to have all the familiar places and fortresses. That really got me playing a game I wouldn't have done otherwise at that age.
So just, even though it was Risk branded, because it was Lord of the Rings, you were like, oh, I'll do this.
Exactly. And then I got to play Risk, and I found out it wasn't that bad.
You're definitely going to divide the party on that one, but I hear you for sure. Yeah. Related to that, Lord of the Rings, know what people are into, whether it's science fiction or fantasy or horror or realism or abstraction or, anything else. Within those general areas, what IPs do they know and love? Star Trek, Star Wars, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I mean, I know I'm kind of dating myself with that reference, but there are games with Buffy themes.
Just going to interject here because I know that we've talked in the past when I've been on before about how new gamers may not know what types of games they like, but you can find out like what they like in general as a person, and I think that's really what you're getting at here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there'll be times for those games that don't market themselves as well right out of the gate, but that time will come after you, as the game introducing friend, have earned some trust and decrease the emotional hurdles by beefing up the new player's skills and knowledge with some other games. It's going to be a lot easier to approach a beefier game if they already know how several of these mechanics work.
I think building up that trust that you mentioned is so important. This isn't game related. This is actually movie related. Just brief sidebar. I happen to be like really into, movies and TV shows and things like that. I have been for my entire life. And my mom, wonderful woman, but she has a really difficult time dealing with any sort of intensity. When it's on screen, I've said, "Oh, Mom, just turn it off." And she's like, "No, she can't engage with any sort of emotional intensity. She just does not find that enjoyable."
So like conflict or violence,
Yeah.
not her bag.
Yeah. None of that. And just emotional tension in general. Just can't deal with it. But, I've learned what she likes and doesn't like. And, after decades of kind of learning what she likes and her trusting me, she'll just turn to me when, there's a discussion about a movie or a TV show. She'll just turn to me and go, "Pete, can I handle that?" And I'll know immediately. I'm like, "Yes, you can handle that." She goes, "Oh, great, I'll watch it." Or I say, "Don't go near that, Mom. You will not enjoy that experience."
That's awesome.
And then she's like, "Oh, if Pete says I won't enjoy it, I know I won't enjoy it." So, I mean, that's just an example of building up that trust with somebody can be really rewarding, actually. On an entirely different topic, I think it can be really important for new gamers to start with a short game, a game that doesn't particularly need much explanation in theme or purpose, and especially rules and mechanics. It lets people get into the game immediately and experience some real success, win or lose success in engaging with a game and the components and the mechanics. Give something right off the bat that people will enjoy during game night, and if worse comes to worse, somewhere to retreat to if a more complex game goes sour. They can go, "Oh, let's just go back to the simpler game we were playing earlier." Get some easy fun in the bank in case the main event of the evening just doesn't work out.
Right. I think it'll also allow them, to reflect later on. It's like, "Oh, well, I guess I did have fun at the games night." This type of game that you're describing, this short, fun, maybe lighter game, I think you could call this like a warm-up game. But I also, this might also be the only game that you play for your first game night. If they come back, I'd count that as a success. If they have enough fun, they want to see what else you brought, count that even as a bigger success. Because I know, even now, when I'm tired but looking for some fun and my partner wants to play a game, these short and light games are frequently my go-to games because I had fun with them. I associate them with a good memory, and they're approachable, especially when my emotional energy is low, but I'm still looking to do something.
So if that short game happens to be a success and they're ready for more, you want to have a main event of the game night waiting in the wings. This is going to be where you're going to make the biggest ask of your newbie in terms of rule learning and emotional energy, and also where you hope the biggest payoff will be. Try and ramp this one up as best you can. I was so excited to get into D&D when I saw my friend Lee's foot-high dragon miniature.
That's not so many.
No. It got me over a lot of potential hurdles with the rules, because I wanted to get eaten by that dragon.
I'm sorry, just to decide, I just thrown back to how many times Sarah and I, for some aspect of Corex and Coffee, have walked into a game store together, and, she goes to the games that she likes, and I want to look at everything, but I'll see a miniature display either out on a table or in the glass case or whatever, painted display, and I'll grab her like, "Oh, Sarah, check this out." You're like, "Isn't this so cool? These are so expertly painted."
Cue the eye rolls.
I don't want to speak for you ultimately, Sarah, but I will. You look at me and you're like, what is the point? And I'm like, and they're beautiful. They're so beautiful, and they're cool to interact with and look at, and they're part of this game system. And you'll say,
I will say, look at all the dust they're collecting. I mean, like, there was one thing that you said in there, which is, like, they're cool to look, like, look how beautiful they are. Sure. And then there's another thing you said in there that was they're fun or cool to interact with. And I'd say absolutely not. You can't interact with that. But that's just me.
okay, so we're not going to come to a quorum on that. So let's move on.
There are games for everyone, and those are going to be different.
Yeah, exactly. That's really the takeaway, of course.
Again, know your audience.
Yeah. I think, whatever game you're playing, hopefully you're all enjoying it. I think it's important to tell people how to win and how not to lose. New game players especially will see a game system, even in, a small box with a 20-minute playtime, and they will know how to play because you just taught them the rules, but they don't quite understand where they're going or what the end goal is, even though you're like, you win in this way. Games are destination focused, at least finite games. But at some point, hopefully, they'll enjoy the experience of being in the game and being clever and fun. But most of the time, you need a victory to lure people into the game further in order for it to truly have a purpose. Because everyone wants to win, like winning is fun. Losing can be fun too, but it's important for them to know how to get to the finish line, so to speak.
I'd say that for newer players, it's not fun to lose.
That's fair.
I think newer players don't want to lose. I think it's important, as the person teaching the game, to be able to tell them how to protect their king, for example. Keep your shield in front of you and stab the person stabbing you. Maybe enough for them to start taking a stab at it, start developing a strategy, being able to become more immersed rather than just fearful at making the wrong move.
And if they lose before they feel like they're really playing, that's what you really want to avoid.
Right.
I remember one of my childhood friends, and, when I was 7, 8, 9... he's a couple years older than me, like 2 years older than me, and when you're 7, 8, 9, 2 years is a big deal. So he's a very close friend, but he was also kind of this mentor figure in all things. And he and I used to play tons of games together, Will Lyserson. And when we played games together, he introduced me to, Starfleet Battles and Axis and Allies and Battletech and a whole host of other things. When I would get stuck, he would kind of drop verbal hints about how to win. He wouldn't tell me what to do because he didn't want a quarterback, and he was keen enough, even at a young age, to understand that. But he would drop hints, be like, well, if you did this, this would happen. Or if you did this, this could potentially happen. And sometimes I loved that because I could tell he respected me enough to let me make my own decision. He was just trying to help me along, and that was great. And sometimes, I do have to say, though, it drove me crazy because if he gave me a hint after hint after hint and I still had no clue what to do, then I felt stupid. So it can be tricky, and he was doing his very best, and I really appreciated him for that, and, I was struggling with it. Thank goodness it didn't turn me off of board games altogether, obviously, but it can be tricky to guide someone through this. I mean, ultimately, they're gonna either like board games or not. They have to make that decision for themselves.
So you may want to try co-op games first. Remember, no quarterbacking. You're not trying to make every move for them. Something you can succeed at together is great, but they need to know they actually helped through their own choices and abilities. They're new to gaming, but they're not blind. They know they're not going to be impressed by the game if they know they didn't contribute.
And I have found that many individuals new to board gaming had no idea that cooperative games even existed before they were told by me or somebody else. And when I tell someone who's, I just happen to meet in a game store, and I kind of sidle up to them as I see their wheels turning, trying to pick out what they might like. And I'm like, hey, I don't want to be a know-it-all, but let's talk about games and see if I can help you, and maybe I'll learn something from you too. Or I'll just be talking to a family member or friend, and I'm like, hey, cooperative games exist and they're a thing, and more of them come out every month. I get this wide-eyed expression more often than not, much more often than not, and I see their gears turning in a whole new way, and they seem to be thinking like, wow, that is something that I would really be interested in trying. I had no idea. I thought all games were just all against all.
Most classic games people are familiar with are either dueling games, one against another, or free-for-alls. And knowing that there are other ways to resolve conflict in games can be helpful.
Another thing I'm thinking about is that mistakes happen, and when teaching a game to somebody, the idea of like having time travel almost can be really useful. It's important to be able to have players explore their turn beyond their mistakes. Yes, they made a mistake. And, well, let's see if we can set aside that mistake just to see how things could have played out if that newer player didn't forget to do the thing that they were supposed to do. It kind of allows them that grace within this board gaming world, right? That, like, oh, shoot. Like, you want them to be engaged, and you want them to be able to actually experience the game in light of their mistakes.
Right. Technically, you just lost the game, but let's rewind a couple seconds and keep playing, because that's no fun.
I'm just thinking about engagement, right? Keeping someone engaged in an activity, whether it's board games or anything else. And the reality is that most people are going to enjoy an activity more if they can see incremental progress in their ability, if they can see themselves getting better at, whether that be going to the gym, playing board games, synchronized swimming, you name it. And there are ways to get better at board games, certainly specific board games, but there are ways to get better at board games in general. And I can remember things that I wish I had known about board gaming in general 30 years ago that I know now.
Absolutely.
I think about things that I wish I had known a year ago. I'm like, oh, if only I'd known this a year ago, I would be much better at thinking about this type of game. And I think it's really important to model some of those things. Certainly not, over-explain and harp and teach too much. But if you can model certain behaviors and people will, pick up on what they pick up on, that can actually be a great boon for people who are new to this type of activity and thinking in jargon.
If a player asks you a question, you obviously want to answer it.
Don't just stare blankly at them. Do answer questions.
Right. And go with it whenever they want to engage on sort of a meta level, because that is also a big gamer skill of talking about the game, talking about what you're doing. And so anytime they ask a question, that's a good time to start talking about why they're doing what they're doing. But don't force it on them. Sometimes they just want to experience the game for themselves.
This is going to seem appallingly obvious in hindsight, but I'm going to say it anyway. Encourage a new gamer. Never criticize. Talk openly about your turn. When you are taking your turn, just verbalize it. Be like, oh, I'm doing this to do this, and I'm thinking about doing this.
I'm holding on to this resource because it might come up later in this.
Right, exactly. And you can just talk about it as if you're talking to yourself, or you just don't want to dupe anybody. But if you talk openly, like, people are smart, and they're going to pick up on what you're thinking and how you're thinking and why you're doing what you're doing. It's much better to talk openly about your own turn than to tell them what to do. Nobody likes that.
Right. I'm thinking about how new gamers, they're there because they want to be engaged for the most part, right? And I remember the first time I played Hero Quest, the storyteller referee, or the Zargon, right, in this case, made the comment, "It's interesting to me that you are splitting your party so much." And that was just a comment of how I was playing. It wasn't a criticism. It was just noticing something, and noticing something in a way to bring it to my attention. And sure, maybe I wasn't doing super great. Maybe because I was splitting the party, maybe for other reasons. But I was having fun, and it wasn't an overbearing comment. And the next time I played, I kept my party closer together, and I still don't think I did well, but I was able to see what different playing strategies or styles looked like at the encouragement of thinking about these different options from the more experienced gamer in a really gentle and just, noticing, non-critical way.
Certainly, as we've said multiple times, the highest and most important goal is for everybody to have fun, whatever that may mean for them. And it can be difficult but also very rewarding to balance the different types of fun people are having around the gaming table. I think it's also important to model playing to win, not just playing to have fun. Because, as we've already mentioned, many games are goal-directed towards winning. And if a new gamer doesn't understand how to win the game, or that the goal is to win, and is just kind of mucking around in the space, that can be a challenge to make the game have purpose for the entire group. And this can be a subtle distinction, but it's kind of critical.
Going off of that, I think about how we've talked before, new gamers are smart, right? They know when they haven't been helpful in a game if it's a co-op game, right? But they also know when the more experienced gamer is just totally not playing the game in order for that new gamer to win, right? So I think sometimes the experienced gamer hedges too much. It may be important to cut your friends some slack in real life, right? But when you're playing a game and the goal of the game is to win, it's okay to be brutal about that, right? Again, know the people at the game table, but if they have territory and you need it, take it. You don't have to be apologetic because that's playing the game. You don't have to ask the permission. It's also teaching the players how to play the game, and you're modeling like how to do that, how to interact in a competitive gaming environment.
I completely agree with that. I think new gamers are very smart people. The only thing I would add to what you said, Sarah, is that I have seen time and time again that an experienced gamer brings a new person to the table just to stomp all over them and just destroy them. And don't be a bully. Like, if you get your fun and jollies out of completely destroying a less experienced person at an activity, in this case board gaming, that you're very experienced at, maybe bringing newcomers to that space is not the activity for you. The only thing that is going to achieve, or only two things that's going to achieve, is making you feel superior, and it's an absolutely hollow victory. Good for you. You trounced somebody that you were way more experienced at. Like, that's worth nothing. Just know that, please. And
someone who trusted you enough to come to a game, and then you trounced them.
Sure, don't be a bully. You may not be able to cut that friend some slack in real life because they may no longer be your friend.
Yeah, the only thing it does is, make them realize that you're a jerk. Like, is that it's terrible. And I think the other thing that's so important here is that the fun is in the trying to win, not the winning. This is such a critical distinction. And it's certainly not my distinction, but I do want to emphasize that every chance I get.
This reminds me of a camping trip that I did where we were going down the river in canoes. And the point of the trip was to have fun. But going down without a map and without a destination in mind would have just been kind of an aimless wandering. So yes, you have to have fun in the forefront of your mind, but you have to be moving towards the victory to get there. Otherwise, you just you get lost in the woods and you get eaten by bears. And that's not great.
Maybe for the bears it is. I don't know.
Well, maybe. So yeah, seeing you win and having fun, that can be appealing. Even if they're not winning, it can be good to see, oh, okay, that's what it looks like when somebody is playing a game and is being good at it. But seeing you just not succeeding at all because you're trying not to step on their toes, that's not going to impress. Because again, they know.
Yeah, they sure do.
Yeah. So sort of on that same wavelength here, you want to show the newcomer that messing other players' plans up is a good thing.
Yes.
Sometimes, especially if your plan isn't ready, there's just a lot of value in kicking over the house that they're trying to build to buy you a couple more turns to get your house in order. It's best to make your optimal move, but sometimes your optimal move is just throw a little chaos in it because things are going too well for them.
I think it's important to model taking that in good fun too, right? When my house gets kicked over, by another gamer, be that somebody new to the game or gaming or experienced person. I'm like, hey, you know what? Good on you for seeing my plan and screwing it up. Like, that's definitely frustrating for me in the game space, right? Because you screwed up my plan. But, more power to you if you can do that. Even praising them, praising them is like, hey, you screwed up my plan. That's awesome. And like, I learned something about them as an observer and player, and hopefully I learned something new about the game and how I play. Like, that's great.
Kind of a nice, you underestimated me moment.
Honestly, I think that's one of my favorite moments as a newer player is when I am able to screw up my fellow player who's more experienced. Like that for me is like that success moment, more so than actually winning the game. If I'm able to get in there a couple of times throughout the game and just kind of screw with someone else's plans who's played this before, that feels so good.
It's an acknowledgement of respect and formidability if somebody who's more experienced can look you and say, you know what, you got me.
Yeah, like I'm actually catching on and I'll show you.
Cleverness is great, especially if it isn't yours. If I wanted to be the only clever one here, I'd play alone, but I'm not playing alone. I want somebody to best me every once in a while.
Something else I want to talk about is, modeling knowing how you can win. And I know this sounds similar to something we talked about before, is modeling like approaching victory and knowing one way to win. But I want to mention this in a slightly different context, in that not all games, but many games have multiple ways you can win. Model knowing what all of them are. Figure out the steps you need to take to get to your long-term goals. Break them down into short-term goals. If you need to build something, how do you get those resources? If there are multiple resources or conversions, how do I do those conversions? If I need to move, one of my meeples or counters from point A to point B, how do I do that? Can I have a victory through economics or military victory? Like, what are the paths for those? And so on and so forth.
And don't just focus on your favorite way to win. That can be actually a little fun if you're a very experienced player to say, you know what? I have never actually won through diplomacy. Let's see if I can pull that off. But model being able to switch from a science victory to a military victory or vice versa. Don't box yourself in, and don't teach the people that you're training to box themselves in. There are multiple ways to go about this, and it's important to explore the space enough to find them.
And you can model that too, right? And you can verbalize that as an experienced player. Be like, hey, you know what? I haven't tried this before. Like, let's see if this works. Play how you wouldn't normally play. And if you play in a way that you've never played before as an experienced player, you're able to bring your experience to that game and games in particular, but you're also a newbie on a particular pathway genuinely, and newcomers can soak in that genuine space that you're in and be like, hey, let's see what happens here. Always trying to get that victory.
But maybe by taking a roundabout way.
Right. Yeah. And, the reality is, if you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always got. And it could be fun to explore something new. It's just a game.
So this can be particularly important in infinite games the newbie's coming into, like a LARP or a D&D campaign. Some ways of winning just might be out of reach for that new player. I, for example, at my LARP, I couldn't defeat the warriors or mages who've been playing for years. They just have stats that I don't have, and they have skills that I don't have, and they're better at throwing the beanbags than I am. But I could be a decent thief from the get-go, because just looking at the rules and the ways to sort of achieve victory and dominance, though that was some low-hanging fruit, so I could go for that. And I could also go for bandaging, which was very easy to pick up. Putting some versatility into my character let me have fun and contribute, even when I was significantly outgunned on other fronts. So just having that ability to sort of roll with the punches and not get stuck in your plan is very important, and it's something you want to teach to new players.
And speaking of players, and this is going to be one heck of a stretch of a transition, Rick, from that. I really appreciate what you said. I'm just thinking, I think it's important to model playing the same game with different people.
Yeah, I think very often a given individual will use the same strategy for a given game over and over again. We kind of talked about that, about how you should maybe play how you wouldn't normally play. But even better, I think, is to play the game with different people. That different people, as a new player, you will learn from watching other players. Even as a more experienced player, you learn from watching other players. And so playing with different people or more people, if it's a 2 to 4 player game, how you play as a 2-player game is going to be different than a 4-player game. You're going to have to use different strategies. You're going to have to think about different things just because the dynamics are changing.
And that can be a very exciting place to explore. Come back to your old gaming group with a new trick. Always fun.
Right. You can discuss that experience of playing the game with multiple people in that way.
I'm thinking about it, and for me, the reality is that playing games with different gamers who had different approaches to gaming was actually incredibly formative for me. I'm thinking about 2 of my childhood friends, one who I've already mentioned actually in this episode, Will. And Will had an older brother, Ricky, and the 3 of us would play games together frequently. And Will and Ricky actually had radically different approaches to going after their objectives in most games, at least that we played together. Will was older than me and Ricky was older than Will was. So again, they were kind of both my gaming mentors, friend mentors in a way, but I was definitely, spent more time with Will because we're closer in age. Will tended to be far more aggressive from the outset, which was often devastating to his opponents in games. That was just his play style. Ricky tended to be much more subtle, biding his time, was willing to get knocked around when he was in a difficult position, unwilling to reveal his true intention. But when he did reveal his true intention or strategy, it was often too late to counter him. And both of these strategies were either very effective or ineffective at different times, depending on the game we're playing and depending on a number of other variables. But it really was a true privilege for me as a young gamer and a young person to kind of see these different perspectives and styles go head to head in different things and so on and so forth. So anecdotal as though it may be, I can't stress enough how important it could possibly be to really play games with different groups of people.
Well, and it also seems like Will and Ricky forged these strategies to deal with each other primarily.
Probably, yeah.
And then they tested them out on you, which, speaks to the point.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly what happened, for sure.
So another important thing to teach the new gamers in your life is that if you want to get better at running, there's no substitute for running. And it's the same way for board games. If you want to get good at playing board games, you really just have to get started. You can read the rules, you can watch the explanation videos, you can read reviews, watch playthroughs, you can do all of that, and that'll get you about 5% of the way there. By playing the game yourself, you get a much deeper understanding of how the game systems work together, and you start seeing what the piece was supposed to be, as opposed to just seeing the brushstrokes. Playing games is a skill like any other. You've got to mess up, and that's normal. It should be expected, and it's got to be okay.
Yeah, I think it's really remembering that this is just a game, and you have to be able to dive in, make mistakes, laugh them off, and keep going. This is not a life or death moment. This is fun. This is a game.
But you can sit on the side of the pool as long as you like, but until you jump in, you're really not going to get started.
Yeah, I think it's the same about learning about what types of games you like. You gotta try them out to figure that out. You can stand in that board game store, like I've talked about, and feel so overwhelmed and not know where to start. You just gotta pick a game and give it a try.
And that's true for any activity, right? Quentin Tarantino, who's a film director, and when he was incredibly hot and famous, in the early 2000s and, whatnot, he was interviewed so many times and he was asked, what film school did you go to? How did you learn to do this? Who are your mentors and so on and so forth? And he would always answer that question the same way and say, I didn't go to film school. I went and watched movies. I went to films. And I've never taken the time to verify for myself whether or not that's true. So I don't know. But I think the point is clear in that there's no better way to get good at get experience in board games and play board games, just like running or anything else. And for myself, even now, when I read a review or watch a review or read a rule set or look at components for a game, there are plenty of times that I'm spot on the money saying, oh, I'd really enjoy this game for XYZ reason, where I really wouldn't for ABC reason. There are plenty of times that I'm just wrong. And I don't know that my evaluation before playing a game is any better than chance level, to be honest. There are so many times, I've never tracked it, but there are so many times when I think a game just looks awesome, and I will get it and I will play it and I'll be like, you know what, I hate this. I don't want anything to do with this game ever again. And that's very dramatic, but that's kind of the bottom line. Or there are times when I'll be like, you know what, this game, I'm not feeling it, I don't see it, and then I'll play it and I'm like, you know what? I see the value in this game. I really do. So, again, no substitute for playing a game.
Dive in there and get started.
Another thing that I think is important to mention, and this one can be challenging and it's not for everybody, is model discussing how a game went with other players at the conclusion of the game. For many, certainly not all non-gamers, talking about a game after the game playing experience is over comes across as pointless or frivolous or just not fun. So it's important to feel people out about that.
Sure. But there's no denying that this is an essential skill that the gamer has. To be able to discuss a game, talk about how this game went, and it makes you a better player. It also helps you get to know your fellow players as people as well as getting to know them as players. So if it's something that people are open to,
I think for shorter games especially, maybe not like super short games, but in general where it might be easy to play again, if the new player seems interested in the game and seems to have had a good time, but they didn't do as well as they had hoped, and you can tell when this is the case, right? It might be worth it to take a moment or two to kind of process that. And again, I am not talking about doing a full metagame analysis, right? Because I really don't think non-gamers are going to be able to do that. But simply providing comments such as, I noticed that you did XYZ in this moment, which I thought was brave. You might be interested in seeing how ABC might go in that moment instead. Or seeing if they caught on to that moment as their growth area. All of that can be really helpful. But how you say this and if they seem interested are really the key factors of whether or not I think you should do that.
This is another one I've been thinking about a lot lately that can be really touch and go for people who are new to gaming, but that gamers do all the time, which is looking at strategy guides online. And strategy guides can mean so many different things, from a forum to a blog to a dedicated strategy guide for a game.
Sure. Sometimes it's just as simple as asking, how do you manage your mana? Because I'm always running out. And, you get 3 or 4 people who wrote a couple sentences on it. If it exists, there's an answer to this online. And sometimes, again, if you're reading the rules and you're trying to get your brain around this game, you may just not understand what you're supposed to do at this moment. And having just a tiny input from another person, even if they're online, even if you never meet them, can crystallize the way you see the game and get you on the path to actually playing and having fun.
There's so much game content online in the form of reviews and playthroughs and game strategies, so much stuff to wade through, so much content to choose from and absorb, including ours. We're so excited at Corex and Coffee about building up our own library of content on our website and other places we are.
I think if they're listening to us, they know that already, but yes.
That's fair. There's so much content that can help gamers, new and old, experienced and inexperienced, get plugged into what they like and get into the metagaming that they find helpful and interesting and get plugged into the thing that's right for them. We have said before, and I will say again, if you have the slightest interest in gaming, there are some people that have no interest in gaming, and that's fine. Like maybe crocheting or geocaching is the thing for you. Fantastic. But if you have the slightest interest in gaming, I guarantee you there is a game for you. And by the same token, if you have the slightest interest in metagaming, learning about strategy, connecting into the community, I guarantee you that there is a community or a forum or a strategy guide for you. There just is.
I think I'm sure that's true, right? But I would also just remind you that if they don't seem interested in this, and they may not be, don't push it. I'm certainly someone who will watch a game review if you put it in front of me and it's not longer than 20 minutes. But other than that, I'm not going to be searching that content on my own. It's just not something that I want to do with my time. I want to play the game.
So you always also want to try and model for new players that skill of planning for several turns ahead. This is something that you hear about all the time in chess. Being able to see how a move is going to go and how it's going to ripple into the future. But this comes down to having a short-term and a long-term plan to win. In the short term, I'm going to start taking some pieces, narrowing my enemy's options. In the long term, I'm trying to set up this strategy. If you know what you're aiming for overall, you'll be much better at rolling with the punches and making decisions that fit in with an overall strategy. You'll also be much better at identifying vulnerabilities and seizing opportunities when they come up. But the most important thing of all is the most challenging opponent out there, which might be you, is often the one who's Johnny on the spot with Plan B.
In gaming and in life, it is so important to have a Plan B. Just to make sure that when you implement Plan B in a game, that if a new gamer messed up your turn, you're like, oh, I have Plan B, because we've already talked about how validating it can be for a new player to screw up an experienced player's plans. And if an experienced player probably does have a Plan B, just said, oh, I'll just do Plan B, then it just seems for not that a new player screwed up the plans. It seems like they didn't have any real impact on the game and just sends a message that they don't actually matter, which can be emotionally crippling. Treat that one carefully.
In LARP, we have this concept of role-playing your hits. It doesn't matter if you have 100 HP or 1,000 plans. If someone stabs you into the gut, you grimace and you curse under your breath and you say, ah! Don't no-sell your opponent. That's not fun for anybody.
I will say, having planned out several turns ahead, we say, make sure you've done this, model this, all this, that's great. But that is so much easier said than done, especially for newer players. We're going back to this feeling so emotionally overwhelmed by this new game, you're learning something new, and then on top of that, you're telling them to learn something new and plan ahead and anticipate, and it may not happen, right? And it certainly won't happen that first night, but it's something to work towards.
I think that's totally fair. And I think that can be a tricky rope to walk as well, because on the one hand, you want to model, oh, hey, thinking ahead is possible. This is a thing that one can do.
And should do.
And should do, ultimately, right? If they want to be formidable in a given game. And on the other hand, if you just model, oh, I can think to turn 2 ahead and 3 and 4 and 5 or whatever, and they just look at you and think, I'm just thinking through the mechanics of my turn. There's no way I can get to that. That can be disheartening as well. So just be careful with that.
And be careful what you say. Don't be the guy who's sitting there and saying, checkmate in 6 turns.
Well, again, that gets back to bullying, right? That's just intimidation and bullying. If you're playing with a buddy that and you enjoy that trash talk, and we've talked about trash talk in previous episodes, then go for it, right? But don't say checkmate don't say checkmate in 6 moves or the equivalent to a new player. That's just awful. There's another skill I want to mention that can be disheartening for new players or people who hear mathematics, and just get disheartened, right? But the reality is there are no board games and no video games and pretty much no anything else under the sun or above the sun or including the sun without mathematics. And modeling mental arithmetic and disclosing your model arithmetic in board gaming can be so important.
It's true. And especially if the game ends when some player has 10, victory points, something like that, you want to make sure to keep a running tally of who has those points already. And, especially in training games, you're going to say, hey, just to let you know, we're racing to 10 points and Pete has 8 already, so it might be time to gang up on him. And also keep track of what other people can do with the resources they have in front of them. If you're seeing a lot of stone over there and you're saying, oh, it'd be really bad if Pete built a road right now, remember how many stone he needs to build a road, and maybe don't let him get that 8th one.
Right. I mean, in playing only the cards that you need to play rather than playing higher point cards and overkilling something and wasting resources. I mean, maths helps you win games, help you play games, and playing games helps you become better at maths if you're paying attention. And you can do this by counting out loud, not when other people are trying to count. That's obnoxious.
Yes, not obnoxiously.
Other players will pick up on what you're doing. And I know I said just a minute ago that whether you realize it or not, you're doing mental arithmetic in playing any board game. And for anyone who would be like, oh, I'm never playing board games again because I don't want to do mental arithmetic. Hey, guess what? You don't wake up and are awake for more than 30 seconds in the morning without doing mental arithmetic. When you wake up, you're thinking, oh, okay, I slept in a little bit, so I have this much time for a shower and this much time for coffee and this much time to pet the cat or the dog, and then I have to be out the door because I have 11 minutes to get to work. I need to be at my desk on time because my boss chewed me out last week. Like, you're doing mental arithmetic all day, every day.
I can afford to hit that snooze button one more time, and then I need to get going.
Exactly. Mental arithmetic.
I will be the first to say that I don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about the mental arithmetic that I'm doing while playing a board game or at any point in my life.
Try and ease people into it, because math, for a reason, is a lot easier for most people to swallow than just, hey, let's do a bunch of math. A lot of people will pick it up a lot more easily or quickly if there's victory or money on the line.
But also recognize that it may turn a lot of people off.
You also want to display for this new player knowing yourself. Being able to look at your personal strengths and weaknesses and being honest with yourself about what you're good at and what you aren't. And a lot of this is knowing where your pitfalls are. And if you don't really do well, if you don't have a plan, always have a plan. If you don't really do well at bluffing, then don't put yourself in a situation where you have to lie. That sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's important to make sure that certain games match your skill set and your interests, right? So disclosing what aspects of gaming that you like, don't like, are good at, or not as good at, and that you're working on honing, that can be really helpful, right? Both for that newer player to think about what aspects they might be good at, or not good at, or not like, but also to recognize that, hey, maybe this more experienced gamer is still working on things. They're not automatically the expert just because they've logged more hours at everything. You, as the newer player, might be good at some things that experienced player isn't as good at.
And it's also okay to say those things. It's okay for the newer player to say, I'm not having fun playing this game. Okay, great. That was information I needed to know. I can stop torturing you now and try something else.
Even better if that new player knows why they're not enjoying it, but that can take some time.
And also, if you have crutches or workarounds, share them. For example, when role-playing, I often have trouble coming up with something to say when my character should know something, but I don't know. I try to have a stock reply ready for each character. I find it's much better to be offended by the question or impatient to deal with the matter at hand than to admit that I don't know if I have any siblings or not because I haven't written that down yet.
Yeah, thinking about your own skills and the tricks that you might use, I think there's also some benefit here of sharing what you notice about the other player, that newer player. If they're open to hearing it, of course. Asking before you share. And if you start and their body language changes to show that they're no longer open to hearing what you have to say, or they didn't want to hear it in the first place, make sure you zip it, right? Like, again, that's the over-explaining that no one enjoys. But if they're open to hearing something, I think that's really could be helpful.
And I lose games to new players all of the time. And when I think that's great. When I'm in a bad space, I say to myself, I do my best to be gracious, and I think most of the time I'm successful at that. But, when I'm in a bad place in my own head, I think to myself, oh, well, part of my job is to know so many games that I'm not mastering any of these games in particular. So, of course, they beat me if they have this skill set, right? But the reality is that when if I'm being honest with myself, the reality is that there are plenty of skills that can be applied to board games that I am not a master at that other people are. And maybe more importantly, playing new gamers, bring in outside perspectives to a new game that I had not considered before, had not interacted with, which is wonderful. And it makes me see that person and that game in a new way. I'm like, I can learn so much from this person.
That strategy that you always use with your gaming group might not cut the mustard with the newbie, and that's great.
So, these are just kind of a few, or more than a few, thoughts on how to model playing games to new gamers to help them improve and help yourself improve, realistically.
So hopefully you feel a little more comfortable bringing somebody to the table and knowing that you'll be able to handle that.
Yeah, and how to engage them and with them within that game space. But again, if they're not feeling the game, just hang out. Come back to the game another time. You want the game to be a positive experience for everybody all the time. And realistically, it can't be because people are people and life is life. But pushing something on someone who doesn't want to engage with it is just not going to go well.
Sometimes it's time to bail.
That's right. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us for another podcast. We really appreciate it. It's wonderful to have you here.
Yeah, as always, I'm happy to be here. Happy to help out.
And thank you at home for listening to Corex and Coffeecast.
We will be discussing more specific topics in the future around tabletop games and specific games. Please do consider supporting us on the podcast. We do have a subscription option, several monthly subscriptions for this podcast, the link for which is in the show notes of this and every other Corex and Coffee episode. This is purely voluntary based. Signing up or not signing up for a donation will in no way limit your ability to listen to any of our content. All of our content is out there and completely free for all people.
Monetary support or no, please like and subscribe or sign up to get alerts when we post new content. We're really trying to get this out to as many people as possible. Please visit our website at www.corexandcoffee.com and consider supporting us on Patreon or through our merch store.
Until next time, I'm your host, Pete Steele.
And I'm your other host, Rick Hendricks.
Take care, all.
Take care.
Bye.
If you ask me, and I know you did, out loud in your car or wherever you are by yourself, maybe on the bus, that's why everyone is staring. I think the best thing you can do for a new player is to make the game immersive. It helps people get out of their shells. Like if you have a game about space, turn on the AC and suck all the oxygen out of the house. Or if you have a pirate game, you could steal all their stuff and add their car to your fleet. Or better yet, if you have a game about making railroads in the 1800s, you can cannibalize your enemies. That might not be historically accurate. Fact-checking my historical trivia are your spunky hosts, Pete Steele and Rick Hendricks, with special guest Sarah Vasa. Music, sound, fury, audio production, and some general malarkey brought to you by me, Keegan King, master of some. Also give yourselves a pat on the back for being the best listeners, so much better than other listeners. Those folks suck. If you liked this podcast, I genuinely don't believe you listen that closely. But it also means you might like our other content. Written game reviews, game unboxing videos, print and play content. all found at coraxandcoffee.com. You can also support us on Patreon or by using the link in the bottom of the show notes on our Anchor site. You can buy stuff at our merch store, and of course, like, subscribe, comment, and rate us on Spotify, iTunes, or YouTube. It's a free way to support us. The quote of the week: it's okay to plan some stuff, and it's okay to figure out what we did wrong. But our plans are randomly going to fall apart, and our lessons are randomly going to be wrong. And if we just keep the cameras rolling and shoot a lot of crap, eventually they're going to reach down their shirt and pull out a laser bomb. Corax and Coffee. Tabletop gaming. Caffeinated.